Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of Innocracy 2021, where we are going to discuss the future of the European Union. My name is Susana Peralta, and I am hosting this session from Lisbon, Portugal. We're not going to spend a lot of time with introductions, so I'll just present our keynote speaker today. So Richard Youngs is a senior fellow of Carnegie Europe. He works in democracy, conflict, and governance, and he has done lots of work about the governance of the European Union. And in particular, he has just published a book called Rebuilding European Democracy, Resistance and Renewal in a Neoliberal Age. So without further delays, I'm going to just let Richard take the stage and make his keynote speech. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Richard.
Thank you, Susanna, and good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all and hopefully contribute to your discussions. Thank you very much to Paulina, Paul, and the team at Innocracy for the invitation. I was asked to reflect for 15 minutes or so on the question of democratizing the European Union. But I want to offer to you what I hope is one very clear, distinctive argument, which is this, that our main a priori focus should be on democratizing European politics in a very general and far-reaching sense, and then feeding in this sense of general democratic renewal to a process of EU reform, rather than vice versa, or instead of a more classical traditional focus on a standard template of EU reforms. So that's the basic case I want to make to you in the 15 minutes I have available. Why do I think this? I make this argument because, perhaps we can move on to the first slide. I make this argument, and the next slide, please. I make this argument because I believe that we are facing very serious challenges and problems with European democracy as a whole, rather than simply with the EU's particular model of integration. So we need to start from this deeper underlying set of challenges facing European democracy and build out from these into a process of reform of the European Union. You've actually jumped on a slide too far. I think everybody knows it's been a rough decade for European democracy. There have been many, many books, articles, opinion pieces appearing almost on a daily basis that point to the problems that beset European democracy. Many people have predicted the end of European democracy, the collapse, the deconsolidation of European democracy. So it's been a very, very downbeat and sobering tone of debate around European democracy over the last 10 years or so. However, while the situation is extremely bad and preoccupying, the challenges facing European democracy have never been quite as acute and deep as they are today. The other side of the coin is that we are also seeing a pushback in defense of European democracy, an unprecedented range and depth of political activity designed to defend core democratic principles across Europe, but also in a qualitative way to rethink what democracy means and to try and innovate in terms of the development of newer kinds of democratic processes. Next slide, please. So I think because of this, the essential challenge is to develop kind of what's going on in terms of this emergent sense of democratic renewal and democratic politics. This offers real potential, but the problem is as yet that it is not fully harnessed to the EU reform agenda. It is certainly the case now. We have all this incipient democratic momentum going on, and we have new commitments and ideas for rethinking the European Union and for democratizing the European Union. The problem of the EU's democratic deficit, you all know, has been around for decades and decades. The commitments to addressing the EU's democratic shortcomings have become stronger. They are receiving more attention than ever before. They are gaining more political traction than before. So we have this process underway of EU reform. I think the key question is whether this emergent process of EU reform, the debates about the future of the EU, can play a role in deepening the process of democratic renewal going on around the European Union. So my argument is that EU reform is necessary. Many of the options relating to EU reform have been on the agenda for many, many years. But this standard template of looking at the EU reform is itself not enough and is unlikely to identify where the agency for deep-seated democratic change is actually likely to come from. So I want to start off explaining why I think that is the case. And for that, we need a proper diagnosis of the situation affecting European democracy today and over the last several years. To get the policy options right, I think we need to start from a more nuanced understanding of what is actually wrong with European democracy and what it is that needs to be reformed. Clearly, all the democracy indices agree that the overarching quality of European democracy has declined over the last decade. There are problems affecting most European states. This is not just a question relating to one or two Central Eastern European states where the democratic decline has been most dramatic, and of course the cases most normally cited. It is a problem that is affecting nearly all European states. Having said that, there's no single trend. The kinds of problems affecting different European states are different. Different European democracies have different strengths and weaknesses. And it's important to point out that the decline in democratic quality has been fairly gradual, fairly nuanced. What we haven't seen, apart from in one or two states, is a dramatic collapse in democracy, democratic standards, or in citizens' commitment to basic democratic values. Many people some years ago were predicting such a process of deconsolidation was already underway. At least today, it doesn't look as if that is happening. The weak points across most European states is a weakening of civil liberties, problems with the rule of law, and attacks on media freedom. The more positive side is a rise in indices of civic participation in newer forms of politics. Governments, even in Western European states, even fairly nominally progressive governments, are actually narrowing the scope for civil society activities. This is becoming a more general and persistent problem across the European Union. In some countries, the problem is kind of very, very strong state control, stifling pluralism. In other countries, the problem is more one of polarization and problems of governability, coalitions being able to form in a smooth and effective way. So the problems are different. The types of populism that have been on the rise are also different across member states. Some variants of populism are expressly authoritarian. Some are illiberal in their policy, in terms of particular policy issues, but don't seem to represent a wholesale threat to democracy per se. So some common trends, a worrying situation, although democracy does not yet seem to be on the brink of collapse, but also great variety and difference between different European countries. The implication of this is that there is unlikely to be one single template of reform at the national level or at the EU level that will work for every single state. The right mix of democratic reforms, political change, will differ across different European countries, And there is not likely to be any kind of single panacea of institutional change that is going to address all the complexities facing European democracy. Next slide, please. So, against that background, we clearly have EU measures for democracy gaining traction. There is a lot going on. We have democracy at the center of the Conference on the Future of Europe. We have the European Democracy Action Plan being drawn up. We have more talk about rule of law conditionality. So the second bullet point here, I believe, is crucial. We have a more serious effort today to try and narrow the EU's democratic deficit than perhaps at any point in the past. So much is happening in this sense. You all know that probably the main and highest profile focus is on the issue of Article 7, a rule of law conditionality. Clearly, the Commission, the Parliament, other actors are ramping up their pressure on Poland, Hungary, anti-democratic developments in other countries as well. This is important, but it's not the prism, it's not the angle that is going to be capable of dealing with these deep-seated problems facing democracy. The focus here is on a fairly narrow set of rule of law issues rather than democracy as a whole. The EU cannot leave to the ECJ, the European Court, the lead role of tackling what is fundamentally a political problem. And of course, as this pressure is ramped up on one or two member states, it will raise questions about what kind of measures are going to be, might be taken in other countries that are also suffering rule of law issues, not as serious as with Poland and Hungary, but nevertheless issues that cannot simply be ignored. So I think this focus on rule of law conditionality, Article 7, is important. It's understandable it is taking so much of the political attention, but it is not a panacea. It's not going to be the focus that is going to democratize the EU in a very wholesale way, and it should not overshadow other areas of necessary and interesting democratic innovation. Which moves us on to the citizen panels and the digital platform that you all know are now being developed under the rubric of the Conference on the Future of Europe. This is a really big step forward. These are well designed. They are offering citizens more of a voice than they've had in any previous similar exercise debating the future of the EU. Some people, of course, raise questions about how these panels and the digital platform are being run, whether they're fully representative. It's still not clear exactly what impact citizens' views expressed through these citizen panels will actually have on the outcome of the conference. You all know that institutional design of the conference is very complicated, and it may be that interesting views, opinions raised through the citizen panels struggle to make it onto the final set of recommendations. So there are reasons still to be concerned about how effective a voice citizens will have in the conference, but this does seem to me to represent an extremely positive and necessary step forward. But I think the key question is whether this exercise in giving citizens a voice under the conference will actually translate into a permanent ability, a permanent process through which citizens can engage and have influence over EU decisions. That's not guaranteed at the moment. At the moment, the purpose is for citizens in panels organized around particular policy issues to express their views on particular policies. It is not yet a process about democratizing the EU per se on a long-term basis. There does seem to be some interest in thinking through how this might be done, but I believe that will be the really essential step that determines whether or not this spirit of citizen participation does actually turn into something meaningful in terms of democratizing the EU. The focus on citizen panels is necessary. Of course, it should also not completely displace the other issues that we all know need addressing, the process through which leaders are selected, the powers of the European Parliament, the need for a parliamentarization of European politics, the need for more powers to Euro parties, the need to get national parliaments involved. This is a standard set of EU reform options that have been debated for many, many years. They don't yet seem to be prominent in the Conference on the Future of Europe. And it is important that attention be given to these alongside these very innovative and promising new citizen panels and the digital platform. However, I think the key, all that is good and it's necessary, but I think my key point is this, and with this I will round off. The key is to understand how these EU reforms relate to the wider democratic agenda. At the moment, the problem, it seems to me, is that these debates over EU reform are not at all connected or joined up with what is happening in terms of the wider democratic agenda, the wider spirit of democratic renewal that is gaining traction across the EU. And the good news here is that there is much that is happening across the European Union. For those that are interested, this is basically what my new book is about. We see many areas of effort at democratic renewal. We see an unprecedented intensity of democratic protests, citizens mobilizing on the streets. Citizens are not apathetic about the fate of democracy. They are mobilizing with greater frequency and in greater numbers than ever before. Not all these protests are good news for democracy, but many of them are. Civil society is thickening, becoming stronger and denser across the EU, and there are many more civil society initiatives working on democratic renewal. Citizen assemblies are increasing in number at the national level, particularly at the local level, some organized by public authorities, some by civil society organizations. The number of local level referendums has increased, offering citizens a voice, at least in some practical community level initiatives. Digital activism is also moving into a new phase and gaining new dynamism. We've seen a whole range of new style political parties forming over the last decade, parties that put democratic renewal at the center of their rationale and at least try to bring in citizen kind style movement dynamics into the functioning of political parties. So there is a lot going on. None of these emerging areas of democratic renewal have gained sufficient momentum yet. They are all subject to limitations and weaknesses. The protests we see don't always translate into coherent long-term political agendas. Many of citizen assemblies are fairly narrowly defined, fairly tame in the agendas that they offer and don't really move up to a high political level. Digital activism still needs to fight against the power of the tech giants and over-regulation on the part of many formal authorities. Civil society has become more dynamic, but its efforts are still rather fragmented and don't really join together into a powerful democratic agenda at the EU level. So there are limitations. There is growing democratic potential, and I think when we move to the final slide here on what is needed, this emergent democratic spirit of democratic renewal offers potential, but the limitations still need to be addressed. And I think here the point is that the EU level of reform needs to harness the spirit of democratic renewal going on at other levels and help it overcome these difficulties and limitations. At the moment, that link simply isn't being made. And I think here the EU reform agenda needs to be framed in terms of helping civil society overcome the obstacles that government are putting in its way, for the EU to engage with a slightly wider range of civil society voices that reflect the newer, more legitimate and those with a stronger presence at the local level working on democracy issues. And there needs to be more effort to engage with the newer style political parties and help them develop, more effort to coalesce together citizen assemblies and help move them to a higher political level, and also to help develop other forms of direct democracy that offer citizens direct votes, but not in a way that simply amplifies underlying polarization. So I think in all those ways, in all those forms, the EU can play a role in further advancing the spirit of democratic renewal that is going on at multiple levels, which leads to my final slide. Three overarching conclusions in this sense. I think there will not be one sole model or institutional template that can successfully democratize the EU. Democracy across Europe needs to take on many different forms, needs to be built through many small-scale efforts rather than there being one magic institutional bullet. So the EU, I believe, needs to be in the service of this multiplicity of reform efforts going on across Europe rather than the other way round. I think the EU reform agenda needs to act as a kind of umbrella or a facilitator of all these different democratic reform efforts and help coalesce them and give them greater momentum and political strength at the European level. For me, that is the way that we can best understand how we democratize European politics and feeding in from that, democratize the European Union. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot, Richard, for this very rich and inspiring talk. So now we are going to have a debate here. We're going to be discussing a little bit the ideas that he put forward and maybe some other ideas. So in order to run this debate, I think that we already have on this virtual meeting the two speakers for the next panel, and these are Franziska Brantner. She's a German politician of the Green Party. Hello, Franziska, and welcome. So Franziska acted as a member of the European Parliament between 2009 and 2013, and she's now a member of the German Parliament. Sorry, just have an interruption.
Don't worry.
Here.
Hello, dear daughter.
Hello and welcome. And we also have Sandro Gozi, who is both an Italian and French politician. So Sandro worked for the Italian government in between 2006 and 2018. He was actually a member of parliament at the Italian, in the Italian parliament, and is now a member of the European Parliament, as a French member of the European Parliament. So this is great because we have a very diverse set of panelists here. In particular, Sandro has this, these two, having worked for two different very important, of course, and big European countries. So I just want to check that. Okay, that was a question. So, okay, that's fine. We'll just start with Franziska. Okay. So I guess I think we all Europeans who are worried about, European governance and the future of the European Union. We are all very much looking into the German election. And I guess my question, so I had a sort of list of big challenges for European governance. And these were, on the one hand, the rule of law problem and how we are going to keep our European Union as a real, union of democracies, of, I would say, adult democracies where the rule of law prevails in all the countries. I had a second challenge, which I think is really important, which is the challenge of economic governance, being an economist myself, and of fiscal solidarity. But I guess that having listened to Richard Young's presentation, I would add to these two challenges another set, I think, of very important challenges that we may be facing, which is how are we going to reform the European Union in order to embrace these new tendencies of, this democratization that Richard, I think, explained much better than I would ever be able to do, with a lot more citizen initiatives, with a lot more digital activism. So in a way, if we are already thinking that we may have we may not have been able to upgrade the European Union to a democracy as we would have liked it to be in the sort of more traditional view of democracy, how are we going now to incorporate all these? So I guess my question to you, and this is more than one question, Franziska, is how do you think the current negotiations of the German government and the possible coalitions that will come out of these negotiations, how are they going to determine each of these three major challenges, I would say, of the governance of our union? I think you are muted. Yeah, I'm no longer muted, but I think Franziska is muted. Because we can see her speaking, but we can't listen, right? Okay, so while we come back to this, while we be able to connect to Franziska again, and while we wait for Sandro Gozi, I think I'll just drop a question to Richard, if that's fine. So, Richard, my question is, you've been very, very. I mean, as I said, your talk was very inspiring because it took us you leave us dreaming about this new wave. Oh, Franziska is back. Okay, so I'll just let Franziska answer my question.
Can you
then.
hear me
Thanks
now? Can you hear me
now?
now?
Yeah, now we can hear you perfectly. Thanks a lot, yes.
Sometimes it's the best to just go out and come back in. I'm sorry for that. I don't know what the reason was. We are having, of course, the Sondierungsgespräche, the conversations to check if we can enter coalition negotiations. So it's a step ahead of coalition negotiations. And of course, the coalition negotiations will be where the detail will be decided. I hope that we can have a pro-European coalition. And of course, I can only tell you now what we as Greens want. And I think I want to speak about three different points. The first is about enlarging the reach and the scope, if possible, of the fundamental rights charter that the European Union has. It's a wonderful document. Not so many know it, but it's actually, I think, quite a wonderful basis of modern rights, social rights included, for our European Union. The problem is, or let's put it that way, it's wonderful because it applies already to European law, but not yet to national law. So the freedom of science, the freedom, of the press is of course in there, but it's difficult for a citizen to go and claim that right when it concerns a national law. So one idea is to say we do extend the Charter of Fundamental Rights and make it usable, in a way that we give every citizen in Europe the same rights in front of the law, and that a woman in Poland has the same rights as a woman in Malta, as in Ireland, as in Germany, and that we do have this equality in front of the law. And I think that's a very important basis for European further integration. So you could say that this is very far away, but on the other side, we have the Conference for the Future of Europe. And I think for us, it's one of the points to say we would like to strengthen European citizens, to start from the bottom, not to say we give more rights to Council, to Parliament, we can discuss this in detail, but to start with the premise that we want to strengthen and empower European citizens and give them more rights. And I think that would turn the debate a bit upside down, with some countries who might not want to give their citizens more rights. And then, it would be interesting to have a debate in all member states if citizens would like to have increased rights or not. So that's number one. And then the second one, I think, which is less, it's a bit more short-term, medium-term possible, is to create and set up a commission of fundamental rights and rule of law. Because we have seen that the assessment of the rule of law, of democratic principles, is of course interpreted and applied quite differently in EU member states, and there's nothing inherently bad about it. We come from very different law traditions, and we have different mechanisms set up. But there are limits of what is still really in the framework of the European Article 2 and what is not. And the question is how do we have a better process, how we define this and who checks on it. And we think one could better work with the Agency of Fundamental Rights that the EU has, with the Venice Commission, to establish a body composed of national constitutional experts sent by national parliaments that then form this body to assess the situation and also come up with joint concepts, etc., that apply to the European Union and its member states. So that would be a second way to strengthen the Charter of Fundamental Rights and the rule of law and its interpretation across the European Union. And that it's less upon just the European Commission to judge, but also to a more independent body that has links to a national level. Second point, and I think that's important, and that's also a bit what Richard Young said, is to support civil society actors in member states and also across the EU. We would like to create a statute of a European non-governmental organization. So far, you can be a German Verein, you can be a French association, you can have the statutes according to each member state, but you don't have a European one. And we would like to create such a status and therefore also facilitate European civil society engagement, but also support those who start up and are, being created and do really we see wonderful how many there are being created every day, and we would like to see more support of this. And then there's this third part of this, of my second point, which is to create the citizens panels. Richard Young spoke about it. I come from Baden-Württemberg. We have been using the Bürgerräte, which is the idea of a citizen panel that is drawn by a lottery. So you have a question and you want to address it with a diverse set of citizens that do represent the diversity of our society by age, by gender, by where they come from, by social background, and that you do ask them questions where you don't have an answer yet, where the government doesn't go on with, this is already our line, so what do you think about, but by saying, this is our question, or that's the challenge, how should we go about it? So this is citizens panels. We would like to bring it now at national level. We have experienced it at state level. It works very well. We would like to do it at national level. We see it's being used now in a conference for the future at European level, and there it could also be anchored for further processes and questions. And last point, where I think if you talk about protecting and strengthening democracy in Europe, we need a much stronger regulation of social media and social media platforms. We see the hate, the conspiracy theories, the fake news that are spread, the polarization that is enhanced by actors like Facebook, etc., because they make money from it. And I think we as Democrats, we have no interest that there is somebody making a lot of money by dividing us as people across Europe, within our societies, and we have to stop this. And I think this is one of the key conditions for saving our democracies, for strengthening them. And this is part of what is negotiated right now in the European Parliament. There will be more steps on that, but I think it's a key condition for all the other aspects we're talking about.
Thanks a lot for this very comprehensive set of reforms on the Green Party agenda. So I don't know if Sandro is now with us. Not yet. Okay, that's fine. So I'll just I guess then ask Richard, because you were so your talk was very inspiring in terms of the civil society engagement and the digital activism and all that, and you say that it's important that European Union democratization reform embraces this sort of grassroots movement that is happening in many European countries, and as you said, of course, at different levels according to the country. And then my question is, wouldn't we? Oh, okay. But now I think I'll just finish this one to Richard this time around. So my question is then, wouldn't we be sort of moving too fast forward, in the sense that we still didn't manage to have, a true democratic European Union with accountability before national parliaments, with true citizen participation at the EU-wide level, and whether or not moving this far, this fast, would it be, or I guess my question is then, what would be the challenges that you see if you really want to now embrace this sort of civil society activism before we actually have an European Union which, with its traditional sort of set of institutions, works?
Well, I think a lot of this kind of citizen-driven energy reflects a frustration with mainstream politics, and I'm not sure it's going to wait for a kind of perfect template of EU reform or institutional reform at the European level. So I'm not sure it could be quite as easily channeled as that through these EU measures. I think that's not to argue against all these kind of EU measures and EU rights treaty and civil society statute and so on and so forth. I think that would be very, very helpful. But I just think the deeper challenge is that there's a lot of frustration that's boiled up over the last 5 or 6 years. It's not just civil society or activism, it's also in the sphere of political parties, in the digital sphere as well. Some of this democratic energy is about protests that are fairly spontaneous and not particularly well organized, not always particularly well focused. Some of it is about local level campaigns that are very well focused, very well organized on particular issues. So it spans a diverse range of activity. I don't think this activity is taking democracy in any one single direction. European democracy and the democratization of European democracy will be eclectic. It will be very varied. I think somehow the challenge for the EU is to draw on that and to try and act as a kind of space where this growing spirit and energy can develop. It won't be easy. It's people are not engaged in these democratic activities all for the same reasons. More EU doesn't necessarily equate with more democracy. The two agendas are not completely synonymous with each other. And I think I would kind of flip your question around really and say that the first aim has to be to develop, advance, and channel this spirit of democratic renewal, and then on that basis develop more ambitious ideas for EU reform.
Thanks a lot. That's very, very interesting. Okay, Sandro, Gozi, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on board. So I had a question for you, actually, which is, of course, as you may imagine, related to the upcoming French election. So we've been discussing a little bit what would be the sort of major challenges ahead in terms of the European Union democracy. And we had listed them as three challenges. I listed them as three major challenges. One is the challenge of the fundamental rights and the rule of law, and what we can do to keep our European Union as really like a political union where the rule of law and fundamental rights for all European citizens prevail. So that would be one first challenge. Then the second challenge, of course, being myself as an economist, I'm very much worried about the economic governance of the Union and the fiscal solidarity within the Union. And then thirdly, that's the challenge that Richard brought in through his very interesting keynote address, which has to do with, as he just said, channeling this energy of grassroots citizen initiatives that are happening in very much, very much across the European Union to different degrees in different countries. And then my question is, how do you see the upcoming French election as contributing or maybe being, more of another, let's say, potential problem into each of these challenges? And of course, feel free to just pick one or two if you think that the question is too wide. Where do you think this French election could help us? Where do you think it could be maybe more helpful in which of the challenges? And where do you think it could be more of, and more challenging, let's say?
Well, how many minutes do we have to answer to your question? Because I could answer in 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day.
3 days. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that for the introduction, since this is your first intervention, I think 10 minutes would be fair. 7 to 10 minutes.
Okay. I mean, the best. I will tell you half serious and half. And I mean, I will tell you that the best way of meeting, facing your challenges and responding positively to your challenges is re-electing Emmanuel Macron. but this is, of course, obvious statement on my part. What will be the main, the outstanding issues in the French elections, and how the French election can help in the two key issues that you mentioned, which are on one side the fundamental values and rule of law challenges in Europe, and the other side the issue of a new investment and economic solidarity policy in Europe. If I resume your question, it turned around these two issues. I do believe that the issue of values, which we thought we could take for granted in Europe a few years ago, is today at the center of our political and societal debates. And it will be also at the center of the French election. And it is obviously a new cleavage in Europe, and a new cleavage also in some countries, some debate. And I think that the beginning of the debate on the presidential election in France is a good example of this. Why do I say this? I say this because today there is a challenge, first of all, to consider on whether we should consider fundamental values and fundamental freedoms as a matter to deal with outside the national sphere, something that many of us took for granted, because after all, we always thought that since the Second World War, we need this supranational organization to ensure the fundamental respect of rule of law and fundamental values. Today, this is challenged. This is challenged politically, and this is challenged legally and institutionally. Politically, it is clear that the new way of nationalism considered as an interference in domestic affairs, the fact that Europeans are concerned about the state of rule of law and fundamental values in member states, and basically the discourse of Viktor Orban, of Kaczynski, is a discourse which is taken on by neo-nationalists around Europe. For example, in France by Marine Le Pen and by Eric Zemmour. This journalist, who is not officially candidate, but is very likely to be an official candidate soon in the presidential election. And this, if you want, it is not a particularly new challenge, but it is a challenge, and it is certainly something which is emerging in the public sphere. It's emerging in the public opinion. And it's something around which we have to take position, and around which the public opinion will take position. The other phenomenon, which is, I would say, new and probably more worrying, is also that other forces which are considered more mainstream forces or Republican forces are getting influenced, and they are absorbing this approach. I mean, if you take my friend Michel Barnier, who is, as you know, a candidate in this internal selection of Les Républicains to become, to choose their presidential candidate. If someone like Michel Barnier, who say that after all we shouldn't recognize anymore the primacy of EU law over national law, and we should question the role of the supranational court of justice of the European Court of Human Rights, but you understand that this is surprising from someone like him, and this means that those ideas, those national or nationalistic approach to the issue of protection of fundamental rights, to the issue of safeguarding fundamental freedoms, etc. This approach is this challenge to this approach is also finding new support among the mainstream forces, and this is certainly, in my view, around also linked around the idea of sovereignty, is already at the center of the debate in France. It is obviously linked to the approach to sovereignty. On one side, you have Emmanuel Macron, which since the presidential election in 2017, and notably since this his speech in La Sorbonne, he identified the European sovereignty as the real answer in some sector, as the real answer to the crisis of national sovereignty. On the other side, you have a different approach from the extreme right, from the extreme left, which want to propose a more traditional national or nationalistic idea of what sovereignty really means. And these are real issues, and it is clear that, to continue to answer to your question, the effects on Europe and the effect of the European Union will be substantially different if Emmanuel Macron is re-elected, or if Eric Zemmour or Marine Le Pen, or even the traditional right win the election on these issues of rule of law, fundamental values. The other outstanding issue is certainly the question of which new economic policy at the European level, which new investment policy, what shall we do with the Stability and Growth Pact in this post-pandemic period? Should we develop a new approach to investment policy? Should we have a new approach to the Stability and Growth Pact? Should we modify it? Should we make easier and allow make more possible investment in key sectors for our future, such as the climate transition or the digital transition sector? Should we should we apply the so-called golden rule on investment policy in these sectors? What to do with the issue of fiscal solidarity? It is clear that this also is something that will emerge. I do believe that on these issues, in any case, from France after the next election will come a message of the need for a new approach, which at least a new approach focusing on the project for the future, on the investment for the future. So a new approach for a real European industry strategy, which also is based on a more flexible and open approach at European level in the promotion of investment in some key sectors, such as I said, climate and digital. Be they at European level, that means, new industrial project between countries, and notably between the key countries in terms of industry, which are certainly, I mean, among the first three, there are certainly Germany, France, and Italy, and also which new strategy to investment and development policies allow at the national level, looking at the European common rules. I would say that this will be less at the center of the debate during the presidential election, but will be much more in the debate after the presidential election at European level. It is clear that from this perspective, Berlin plays a key role. And personally, I hope there will be some development and some positive evolution in the German approach to these policies compared to the Merkel era.
Thanks a lot. That was a very interesting and long answer. So I guess that now, picking up about the role of Berlin, as you said, I think I'm going to, and this is a question for both of you, for both Franziska and Sandro. Do you think that what's happening currently in Germany may have an impact on the following months in France, with the preparation for the May presidential election, and this, I guess this would be more for Sandro. How does the French electorate and political actors, how do they look at what's happening in Germany, and how is that building into the national debate in France?
Well, I have to say that, of course, I mean, it is a big change in the fact that Angela Merkel leaves the political scene after 16 years. And it is clear that also what happens in Berlin is of the utmost importance in Paris, because of the Franco-German partnership, because of the history of these two countries, because of the strong links that there are between France and Germany. So it is clear that certainly the Berlin elections and the Berlin political development are considered the most important in Europe, and probably not only in Europe from the French perspective. I would say that there hasn't been a big debate after the election in the detail of the political development, because we are waiting for the political development. The most important thing, which have been many times said, is that the sooner a new German government is formed, the better, but not only for obvious German reasons. And I would say also that the fact that Germany is going to chair the G7 next year, and I cannot think that Germany won't have a new government ready to chair the G7, but also because there is the French presidency of the European Union, which will start on the 1st of January 2022. And it is very important from the French perspective that a government will be already in place. Ideally, there should be already a meeting between the French government and the French president, the new German chancellor, at the end of November, before the beginning of December, to see what we can do together, both at G7 level and in the Presidency of the European Union. So I would say that what is the most important issue now, which has been asked in Paris, is when there will be a new government. Then, from my perspective, if the new government will be formed, as we read on the newspapers, in the German newspaper in this day, if the new government will be formed between the SPD, the Grünen, and the FDP, for me, this would be a very interesting development. Franziska knows, but also other common friends that have contacted me for this event know that I've been calling around Europe and the rest of the world for years for a new partnership between the Lib Dem, the Social Democrat, and the Greens. I remember we wrote a paper with Matt Brownie, who is a common friend of ours, 10 years ago, saying that the future of the progressive would be based on a political alliance between Greens, Social Democrat, and Liberal Democrat. So if it happened in Berlin, ich würde sehr zufrieden damit. Und ich warte auf. then I mean, what will be? I thought that there could be an effect also on the political force. I think that maybe there will be a positive effect on the Green, on the French Green. The French Green has already selected their candidate to the presidential election. Is Yannick Jadot, a member of the European Parliament. It is clear that, I mean, if the Green came to power in Berlin, certainly that could be an advantage in the electoral campaign for also the French Greens. But for that we have to wait the developments in Berlin.
Thanks a lot. So, Franziska, I guess now the stage is yours. So, how do you see? Do you want to just answer to Sandro's comments about how the current negotiations in Berlin are going to have a major influence, actually, on what's about to come in France?
Sandro, you spoke about that you want quickly to have a German government. And I think that's what we have been advocating for too. We really think that we need a government by the end of the year, not just for the French presidency, also for G7, as you said, also for the Fit for 55 package. There are major dossiers waiting really that need to be tackled and where we shouldn't lose time, because it's also clear for us that if we lose the window of opportunity at the beginning of 2025, then France will be in a presidential National Assembly campaign, and until France will be ready, it will also be end of August next year. So then if we are not ready by the end of this year, we de facto lose an entire year. And I think that's sort of where I've been publicly saying this, that we are, as Germans, responsible for not losing 1 year of European capacity to act on the big dossiers, on the big files like Fit for 55, migration, asylum, etc. So I think that's understood, and I think that also many of the other parties have understood the urgency of forming a government. We've been very fast so far, I think. And I hope we can continue on that speed level, I would say. And the second question, to what extent will it be really a progressive government? Yeah, we shall see. I hope so. Especially on Europe, it's one of the more difficult points, the financing side of a progressive agenda. So let's hope that we will get some good results there that combine a modernization agenda, transformation agenda on climate, on digital, with the capacity to finance that technology, the infrastructure for it. So we shall see. But I hope that we will get there. It's at least what we have been fighting for, and it's an interesting debate. And on the other sides, on the rule of law, for example, the advantage of an Ampel, of an alliance with the Liberals and the Social Democrats, is that I think we could move away from the appeasement policies of CDU and CSU vis-a-vis Orban until very recently, other actors like Janša now in Slovenia. And I hope that the next German government will be much tougher when it comes to the rule of law and the protection of democracy. And I think this is sort of a good news for Europe, and we can make a difference there.
Thanks a lot. So I think I'll just take this opportunity to go on, with the topic of the rule of law. And to ask your own views, Franziska, about how conditional should the European funds be on the rule of law issue. So let me also tell you that being a Portuguese economist, this is something that is very important for us, because we're very much used, as Portuguese, about all sorts of conditionality when it comes to the European funds that get to our economy. And sometimes we're a bit perplexed that these countries that are really, going against the really building blocks of the European Union, they are not subject to the same degree, I would say, of conditionality. And therefore, I would like just to know your views on that. And then I would also like to know Sandro's views, but I'll begin with you this time.
No, thank you. I think we must be tougher. I mean, we have been calling on the conditionality mechanism to be more explicit, tougher. I think it's good that it exists, but it needs to be applied now. I know, Sandro, that you're also working on this in the Parliament. The Parliament has been calling on the Commission to start utilizing it. The European Court of Justice now had a first round of debate on it this week. So I think I hope that it will be applied. And we also should know that already today the EU can stop funding if there's major deficiencies in a country. So I think there are more tools that we already have and that the Commission could and should use. Also the question of the recovery fund, if it should be released to Hungary, Poland. So yes, we do agree with you that this funding should be based on democratic and rule of law respecting government. And yes, it will be interesting to see how the Commission acts now. And we do support a stricter stance.
But do you see that as, possible? One thing is like the Greens' view on these, which is very clear. And then how do you see, according to the current political landscape at the European Commission and European Parliament level, should we, and of course as well the European Council, should we expect this to happen? How likely do you see it?
There are many countries that are upset with what's happening. But as Sandro said earlier on, there are also tendencies in many member states that do undermine the role of the European Court of Justice. I have been really shocked by what Michel Barnier said, and I'm glad that Sandro brought it up here, because he has been defending the European Court of Justice in negotiations with Johnson so many times, rightly so, and now wants to have this constitutional shield against even the European Court of Human Rights. So for me, sometimes I'm like, if we Europeans don't stand up to protect Europe, who will? And I've been upset that he is not doing it in the presidential upcoming now debates and the primaires, the Républicains primaries in the Republican Party. And that's what I find worrisome. So it's in the end, we have to see it's larger than just Poland and Hungary. I think it's within, there it's the most radical, of course, it's on different level, but I think we have to be careful that we do protect it in all our member states as well.
Thanks. So Sandro, do you want to add something on this? Because we do have a couple of questions from the audience, but I would just let you add.
I largely agree with Franziska, but this is not breaking news. On this, we have always agreed. I would give you, in a nutshell, a couple of messages. The first is that, we have been fighting hard against something which is unacceptable. And it's unacceptable that there are some countries, some government who pretend to be pro-European when they receive dozens of billions of European money, and then play the nationalist card when it comes to respect fundamental freedom, rule of law, and that means when it comes to respect the fundamental democratic and political pact at the core of a union that they have freely choose to join, because nobody obliged the Hungarian government or the Polish government to join the European Union. It was a free and democratic decision, and they join a union which is based on rule of law and fundamental rights. And this is the political issue. And then finally, this year, we managed to provide the Commission, notably, with a new instrument, which is this regulation, which for the first time establishes a clear link between the violation of rule of law and fundamental freedoms and the European funds, if a violation of fundamental values affects negatively the use of the European budget. It is a first step toward the right direction. And it is something that we want the Commission to use. The Commission is reluctant, as a Commission wants to wait for a verdict, a decision of the Court of Justice, because Poland and Hungary have brought an action before the Court of Justice on this. We think that we don't need the Court of Justice to wait for Court of Justice. We democratically have approved a new law, a European law, which creates a link between the respect of rule of law and the budget and the European budget, and the Commission should apply it, and should. And the first implementation should come with the recovery plan, with the Next Generation EU. Rightly, the plan of Poland, for example, hasn't been approved yet by the Commission. There are open issues. There is an issue, for example, of the independence of the Polish judiciary, of the magistrature, the strong influence of the Polish government over the Polish magistrature, judiciary, these are already there. They are very obvious. On top of that, there is the new challenge to the pillar of the Union. The Union is organized around one pillar: the primacy of EU law on national law. Because if after lengthy negotiations, it was possible that one country decide not to respect a common decision, invoking an internal domestic law, it is clear that we would be still waiting for the single market. We will still be waiting for the single currency. We will be in day one, because the fact that allowed our European building to be built up is what is this. That, of course, there are lengthy negotiations. Of course, we negotiate. Of course, we decide by unanimity or by majority. But after that, we have decided together that the European law is binding for everybody. You understand that this is the most insidious attack to the stability of the European Union, and it is a matter of concern because, according to many observers, according to the Polish opposition, according to several inquiries by the Council of Europe and by the European Union, even the Polish Constitutional Tribunal is acting under the political influence of the Polish government. So confronted with these challenges, and looking at what's happening in Poland, and looking even at the fact that 90% of the Polish people wants to stay in the European Union, they want to be part of the European political project, I think that we shouldn't wait and use our instrument concerning the protection and the prevention of breaches to the rule of law.
Thank you very much. So if I get it correctly, what you are saying is that we have a sort of double violation, in the sense that we have the influence of the political power on the judicial in Poland, and moreover, of course, the Polish Constitutional Court defying the European law. So it's like twice. Right. It's a twice violation. So we should be even more worried. Yeah.
Absolutely. The fourth violation, the Commission can already freeze the funds, because this, as it is linked to the independence of the judiciary power, is one of the cases foreseen by the new law, we call it regulation, by the new European law on rule of law linked to the EU budget.
Thank you very much. So I have a question here from the audience to Franziska, which I think, if I have to guess, would be related to this proposal of yours of creating an independent commission, on fundamental rights and the rule of law that would be independent of the European Commission, and that would work with links to both the European Commission and links to national authorities. But this is my own interpretation, because the question from the audience is the following: why is the German approach of dealing with institutional reforms to make it more bureaucratic? So why is the German approach of dealing with institutional reforms, Why is it to make it more bureaucratic by seeking even more institutions? And this, of course, is sort of provocative question, but just please go ahead.
No, thank you. I think, that we have, it's not about creating a bureaucracy, it's creating a legitimacy. And I think that we have in Europe the beauty that our member states have very different traditions of how they implement the independence, for example, of the judiciary, how members of court are selected. We have some member states have different. We have very different histories and traditions, and also today applications. And we don't have a uniformity, and I don't think that we need uniformity, but we need a sort of joint understanding of what is still acceptable and what is then going against the rule of law. Also, when it comes to media freedom, freedom of the sciences, etc. And I think that we have for this on a more broader level the Venice Commission that does this work of interpretation of constitutional freedoms, etc. And that we have in Europe the Fundamental Rights Agency. And then we still have the European Commission that does the reports about member states and their deficiencies. And I think sometimes we see from member states like in Poland and Hungary and also other member states that they do say, so why is it the European Commission doing? How are they legitimate to do this? This is a political body. The Commission is elected by the European Parliament. Why are they in a position to do this? And what is our joint understanding on it? And the Commission has created, a justice panel and different ways of addressing it. But we do, I think, need to have a better response to these questions of why is it the Commission? And I think that it would be helpful to have a link back to national parliaments to say that we do have the expertise from national also experts in there and from the European Parliament elected ones, that we have from each member state one constitutional expert, plus then 10 or whatever from the European Parliament, and they do work together and do tackle the difficult questions that they, together with the Fundamental Rights Agency, with the Venice Commission, do develop these standards and do write the reports about member states. I think the legitimacy would increase, and that's what we aim for. So it's not about creating huge bureaucracies, but it's about increasing the legitimacy in our own constituencies back home.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now I have a question, I guess, for the three of you. So this would include Richard. And we're sort of coming to we still have 15 minutes, I guess, but I would ask you maybe to use up 2 or 3 minutes each, which is related to the conference on the future of Europe. So we've been discussing all these challenges of democratization of the European Union. In particular, when Richard will pick up this question, I would want you to think about the links between this, citizen activism and the Conference for the Future of Europe. And then my question is, how do you think the Conference for the Future of Europe will help in these topics that we have been dealing with here? And what realistically we as European citizens, what can we expect from this debate that has just started? And I think, Richard, maybe you want to pick up this one because you've been silent for a while.
Well, as I said in my opening presentation, I think what's going on under the rubric of the conference is very, very positive. It's methodologically quite robust as well. So quite a wide range of citizens are getting their say. But again, to reiterate the point I made, I think these citizen panels are important, but they're a first very limited, modest, tentative step in what is going to be a very long process of getting citizens involved in EU decision-making on a much more permanent basis. So it's a step in the right direction, but I think it would be counterproductive if then what happened was that the conference finishes, the citizen panels disband, a certain menu of policy options are then implemented and debated amongst governments, and then all the citizen dimension is then kind of put aside and forgotten. I think that would be damaging, because this process, in a way, it's kind of raising citizen expectations, raising expectations amongst ordinary people that they can have a greater say in the European Union. And then if those expectations are not followed through, it could actually rebound in a negative way against the EU. I would also make the point that it's democratizing the EU, which is our topic here. It's not all about these citizen panels. It's not all about this grassroots activism. I didn't mean to convey that in my presentation. My point was, in fact, the opposite. There's a lot going on. Political parties are undergoing changes. Political parties need to be part of the process. National parliaments, there's a lot happening within national parliaments. And somehow at the moment, I have the impression there's a lot going on in this sense, but it's quite fragmented. And I still think ultimately, democratizing the EU will be about building up these broader constituencies of support. I agree that the case for a tougher approach on rule of law conditionality is now overwhelming. But the academic evidence is that if you use these kind of punitive measures, they only work if they empower local reformers rather than uncutting kind of civil society voices. And so the EU may use these measures, but that in itself won't be enough to really get democratic dynamics going again in the countries where they've been put on the defensive. So one wouldn't want to see the EU use these conditionality mechanisms and then kind of conclude that that's enough, that's the job done. What is really needed is a more kind of indirect and longer term approach of building up broader alliances, empowering local actors so that they can actually take advantages of this pressure and greater attention on democratic reform. And for me, that's really where the action will be in the future.
Thanks a lot. So Franziska, for the Conference on the Future of Europe.
I agree with what Richard said, and I just said earlier as well in my introductory remarks that we're trying to implement this now at a national level, that we have this as one of the instruments in the Bundestag. We will see if we get it in coalition talks, but that's what we are entering with, and we have experienced it at the state level and at local level, and we had a scientific evaluation of it. And it's quite interesting how it increases the acceptance and the understanding of democratic processes. And I think, everybody who is worried about the development of our democracies should read that report and the assessment of our citizens panels and their impact. And I have been speaking with members who have participated as citizens. In Baden-Württemberg, they get a personal letter from our Prime Minister, Mr. Kretschmann, asking them to join, because we really, think it's important to have this much more diverse participation of citizens. And when you speak to them afterwards, and they have this said several times, they can ask for advice from experts to come in. If they maybe at the end don't agree with their proposals in general, but they come and they told me, what I thought was fascinating, that they understood that our decision making is quite complex and that it's not as easy as black and white, and that they were happy to see how they were as well challenged to find solutions. And I think this already is quite important to get the understanding of what is really at stake. So I think I hope we can implement it at the German level, and I think it would be great if we could also implement it at the European level, and that might be one of the outcomes of this Conference of the Future of Europe. I of course have many more expectations. I want there to be the launch of a convention for for strengthening the Charter of Fundamental Rights. I want it to be an opportunity to move from unanimity to qualified majority voting in left areas. I wanted to strengthen the European Parliament, have a different way of electing transnational lists. So there's a long list, but when it comes to really citizens' participation, I think that this would be wonderful if we could establish it as one tool that parliamentary democracy has to improve its own functioning and citizens' participation.
Thank you, Sandro.
I agree.
Just very quick remarks.
Yeah, I agree what has been said, so I won't repeat it. we have two challenges around the conference. The first is awareness, because after all, what is happening is extraordinary. We never prepare a reform in Europe with such a bottom-up approach. We never combine synergies of citizens directly participating and the representative of the citizens talking and working with the citizens, i.e. member of the European Parliament and member of national parliament and minister and commissioner. So, I mean, this is unique. And it is based also on positive experiences of participatory democracy, things of the convention on climate in France, or of the experiences in Ireland before the referendum on gay marriage, on abortion law. I mean, so it is something which is very important, but there isn't a public awareness. Media do not talk about that. Very few people are aware. And after all, we have selected randomly 800 citizens from 27 countries, which are meeting and debating around the future of Europe. So, I mean, the first challenge is creating awareness, and spreading information, getting out of the institutional and traditional challenges, and trying to reach out through influencers, football star, music star, rock star. I mean, I would like these people to inform the citizen that this exercise exists, the conference, the digital platform, all of what is there to make it happen. The second challenge is what's the day after. I mean, there will be orientations, there will be requests for reform, there will be a new project, a new initiative, which certainly will come out of this exercise. And then the political battle will be how and how much we are ready to ensure a follow-up to this request. To me, this is a litmus test of credibility of this exercise, and it will be the art of the battle, because there will be people like me and like basically the European Parliament who say it is clear that we have to be ready to ensure a full follow-up to the main request which will come out of this exercise. And if this request require new political initiative, let's take new political initiative. If they require new laws, let's adopt the new European laws. If they require revision of the treaty because we want to do more on fundamental rights, more on defense, more on security, more on other issues, we have to be ready to ensure the revision of the treaty. There are other forces which simply consider the conference as a big opinion poll at continental level, and they are ready to ignore the work of the conference. This will be the art of the battle, and this is why we also need awareness, because the higher is the awareness, the more difficult will be for these forces to ignore what the citizens and their representatives are asking for.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have 5 minutes to go, so I guess I'll just give 1.5 minutes to each of you for the sort of final challenging question, which is if you could change one thing about the EU institutional setup, what it would be. This is also a question from the audience. You know, just projecting us into the future, maybe in 10 years, if we want to have if each of you wants to have the European Union that you think would be the ideal, or moving closer to the ideal, because we'll never have the ideal one, what would be the feature of the institutional setup of our union that you would remove? And I think that this time around we can start with Sandro.
Getting rid of the veto. Decide in a democratic way with the majority in the parliament and the majority in the council where the states are represented.
Qualified majority or just simple majority?
Yeah, by getting rid of the veto, because the veto is the annihilation of the European Union. The European Union exists through action. The European Union exists if it is a union of concrete solutions. And if you allow one country, be it big or small, to paralyze the action of the union, you deny the existence of the union as such. So we have to get rid of the veto. We cannot allow it. We cannot afford it. And it is not democratic because, after all, I don't see why one country can block a continent of 450 million citizens when other 26 countries and a majority in the parliament would like to move. So let's get rid of the veto, and that will help a lot to build up a concrete Europe, a Europe of solutions.
I could not agree more. Okay, thanks a lot. Franziska?
Yeah, I would make the European Charter of Fundamental Rights really applicable to all national laws and give every citizen in Europe the same rights to have equality in front of the law. And based on that, I would then build a European Republic, a federal republic.
Okay, thanks a lot. So that's more adding up than removing, but it's very interesting as well. So Richard, please.
To avoid repeating at probably a slightly more modest level, I think the EU does a lot actually now to reach out to civil society, and it does so in a very admirable way, but it still tends to reach out to the part of civil society that is liberal, is democratic, is pro-European. I think somehow the big challenge is to reach out, engage with, include, and genuinely listen to, in a really open-minded way, the parts of civil society that are not so liberal, not so pro-European. I know that European leaders have pay a lot of lip service to that, but if you actually look at the concrete initiatives the EU supports, I think still is not enough is being done in that direction. And it's a difficult balancing act because one doesn't want to empower or legitimize those actors. The EU has to be very firm where illiberal parties cross the line and infringe standards of liberal constitutionalism. But at the same time, I think there does need to be a genuine effort to reach out and engage with the kind of underlying factors that are actually driving that Euroscepticism and illiberal politics. And I think if that doesn't happen, we won't actually democratize the EU or democratize European politics in a really sustainable fashion.
Thanks a lot. I guess the three final remarks were just, great and really inspiring. So it's time to finish and to close I hope, for me at least, it was like super interesting and exciting talk. I hope the audience has also enjoyed and learned from our wonderful speakers. So let me also tell you that this is the final event of today's online Innocracy 2021, and that tomorrow there's going to be an in-person meeting in Berlin. Of course, being in Lisbon, I won't be there, but we are very much looking forward to welcoming all of you in person, those who can join, of course, so that we can go on discussing about democratization, in the way that we should do it, which is joining together and confronting viewpoints. Thanks a lot for having me. This has been really inspiring and very interesting.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.